to review. Now would be the time to bring them up. Otherwise, I'm going to tell you a couple things. And this is not in your book. This is just things, obviously the definitions in terms, and that's just something you have to learn. It's, all those anatomical points, those are just things you have to learn. The SAID principle we talked about, which is your specific adaptation to individual forces, okay? And you know that, we talked about that. So I would know that if I were you because it's very useful. The importance of functional training. At least two of us in this room are really into functional training. So you may or may not be. If you actually decide you're going to teach, you're going to develop your own style and what you like. Lori and I both kind of evolved from the much more strict trainings that we went through. So you're going to decide. I would know the different kinds of stretching. And I didn't say, but in this, the Delphi, this guy that I gave you the information on the recommendations, this is a free article. Now, some articles, unfortunately, I'm retired, so I don't have access, and I don't get free access through a hospital anymore, where you can get everything. But this one's a free article, and I did not tell you that at the bottom of each of those recommendations, there's another little paragraph where they describe things that are alternative or just a little more information. So if you go PubMed and look for this, it's practical recommendations on stretching, you actually have the reference in the slides. So I would recommend that you just glance at that if you're interested in the types of stretching. I happen to be, so it's actually, well worth reading. Okay, what else? We talked a little bit about getting into and out of poses. People get injured when they flop out, especially if you're doing something like Hanumanasana and you're down in a big stretch. Unless you're Carrier Worko, you come straight up out of it, like it's amazing. But most of us aren't going to do that. So you come out of those things slowly. Even triangle pose, if you're doing the long holes, you come out of it as slowly as you went in, okay? We talked about the thirds. You spend a third of the time getting into it, you spend a third of the time in it, and you spend a third of the time coming out of it, which keeps you from injuring large muscles that are on stretch, okay? Because then you're doing eccentric contraction, which makes things stronger, but it's also when you could injure it if you just flop up, okay? What else do I want you to? And we talked about what strengthens the ligaments and the tendons. It's those long holes. Thank you, Yin Yoga, okay? But I had this conversation with Susanna yesterday. It's not really about stretching those ligaments and tendons, because we don't want to do that, because they will only go so far and tear. But stressing them a little bit does make them stronger, and that is accomplished in the long holes, in eccentric contractions, and we did that when we did the chair pose and you're up on the toes, and then you slowly lower down and you come up, and all of this is really slow. Now you're really working your calves. Those are eccentric, and like I said, we don't do as much plyometrics in yoga, but there is a little bit. But if you like to jump around from one foot to the other, you're going to strengthen your ligaments doing it. The other thing is the progressive overload. We did that yesterday doing the side plank where you had the blanket on, because you could do that without the weight, but then you add the weight, so that's a progressive overload. And then you can make it even harder by putting more weight on it. Those are the things that will strengthen your tendons and your ligaments, not to mention your muscles, okay? And the resistance bands you did. You got a little taste of that. Then what stimulates your autonomic nervous system? What stimulates your autonomic nervous system? Your parasympathetic nervous system. What stimulates that? You do it all the time. Yeah, what kind of breathing? Can't hear you. I still can't hear you.
Can I try to answer this too?
Yeah, sure.
So if we're thinking about the autonomic nervous system, there are two parts. When you're thinking about what part do you want to stimulate, and you're asking questions, I'm just trying to understand what part do you want to stimulate. Do you want to stimulate the sympathetic part or the parasympathetic?
Yeah, and I said the parasympathetic part. So what is it you, and those are totally different, as we talked about yesterday. Those are totally different. So the autonomic nervous system, and I said, how are you going to stimulate the parasympathetic system in yoga for yourself? It's those prolonged exhales. And you do it all the time when you're meditating or when you go into Shavasana, when you want to calm yourself down. And those are important things. The sympathetic, I told you, I was in a pranayama class where we were stimulating that and I had to quit. So those are very different, and thank you for that. We talked a little bit about the power of the brain. You did the little exercise where you got heavy and tried to pick each other up and realize that you can ask these muscles to relax, and they actually do it. You can also tell yourself, I can't do it, and you can't. Okay, so remember that your brain is very powerful. The types of contractions we went over, I don't want to go over all of this. You have this information, the isotonic, the concentric, the eccentric. The stretch reflex, how muscles protect themselves without you thinking about it. The muscle spindle, the myotactic reflex, the Golgi tendon bodies. Do you need to know the names of all this? Probably not. But the idea that you know how these muscles will protect themselves or protect themselves from you, I think is important. Okay. The things that affect your balance, your vestibular system, the visual system, and your proprioceptive, and all that's coordinated by the cerebellum. So you kind of want to have a broad view of how your balance is affected and the things that you will do. And we practiced that doing tree pose on the bolster yesterday, and you found out how fast your CNS will learn and transmit that, the ankle transmits that from the sensory receptor to the brain. And you're like, that's pretty cool. Now, if you did it again right now, just tree pose, it may or may not be worthwhile, but if you got on that bolster and did it, it would work, okay? I do think, because I'm all about core, that core muscles, how to use the core. You haven't gone over the inversion stuff yet. We didn't spend much time on back bends. I was going to do that, but Lori's so good at back bends, she'll cover more of that. But I think the core is important for all of it, everything. And having those muscles, learning how to activate, how to use your psoas, how to use the internal and external obliques, even if you don't remember the names. Remembering the action of what happens in your poses. And I don't ever go into triangle pose without really thinking how it feels to me and what I need to do so I can repeat the pose the way I like it to feel. And of course, you know, coming from a Iyengar style background, it was pretty strict. What else? Rotator cuff muscles, you probably need to know those, and you need to know basically what they do. And degrees of rotation of the spine, and you have that sheet that gives you do you need to memorize all the rotations, but you do need to know that the lumbar spine and the way it's situated, you don't have the rotation, but you have that stability because it supports all that weight.
Marilyn, could you address, you know, when we do cross multiple planes of motion with one thing, with something like the spine, can you address the angles that would be more at risk? Like
Oh, absolutely.
Like extension.
Oh, absolutely. The things that, I mean, there's one particular action that more people injure their backs, rupture a disc, those kind of things, and it's this action. It's going to be in this plane, twisted and forward flexed. Back bends hurt if you don't lengthen and get everything in line, but most of us, although I was in a class with Anna Forrest one time, and she was walking around on her hands and flipped from one side to the other in a back bend. I don't think most of us do that. But this action, this twisting and forward flexion, is by far the most common way to injure your back. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but it does mean you need to engage, understand what's moving, pay attention, and say you're just going to pick up this sheet of paper that's over here. I mean, and of course your SI joint could also be involved here if you have that issue, which a couple of us do.
So I just want to point out, because I just corrected all the sequences. So what we're talking about is like not beginner teaching. So when you start to take something like the spine through multiple planes of motion, you need to pause and think, do I know what I'm doing here, right? So that's usually where new teachers go wrong. But when you stay to the traditional poses or in the range of motion of those like if you're doing dynamic movement in a twist, it's the same. You're not changing those planes.
Yeah, you're in the plane.
We're teaching you the forms for a reason, so that you can begin to understand how the body works in those traditional forms, and then you'll know how, you know, eventually over time, how to move and change.
Now, I was going to ask you, the yesterday I was asking about this. This picture
Yeah,
doesn't really
that's
show
the rotation, right?
Yeah, it doesn't show about this, you know, and triangle. I was wondering, this picture doesn't
Yeah,
show
I know the picture. I'm just trying to get your.
this kind of man. Can you explain how far we can go the degree?
Yeah, well, that's a generalization. The number of degrees there.
Yeah.
I don't even know what degrees it says, but
It does show, it does never show this and that. And
yeah.
this triangle, that. So this picture.
So those are generalizations about how far, but in triangle pose, and what you just said was how far could I bend? Okay? But that's really not what we're doing here. We're extending. This is extended, extended, extended. Wherever it goes for you, whether your hand's on the floor or whether your hand's on a block or your shin or your toe, wherever it is. So it's not this.
Okay, so question here, application. Where is the origin of movement in triangle pose? Is it the spine? No. No. Spine's going for a hitchhike. It's hitchhiking a ride on
Yep.
something else. Pelvis. And specifically at the hip, yeah.
Yeah. So, but from here, now just to add in, using your turn to go toward the ceiling, and by the way, I don't ever care if anybody looks up at their hand, unless you want to work on your vestibular system, and it's good for that. But if your neck bothers you, I don't care. But it's these external obliques here, and internal here. Okay, so I activate both of them, but it's not here. It's not the side bending there. Got it? I'm sorry, I can't.
It doesn't rotate, it really is.
It doesn't side bend. It doesn't side bend. It does rotate some, but the whole torso is rotating because of the oblique muscles. And I'm not letting, when I rotate and use the obliques, I'm not letting anything else go with it, okay? And it's very variable from person to person how much you have, rotation. It's just, even if you don't move a lot, if you activate those muscles, then you're working those muscles, okay? I hope that answered your question. The other thing I didn't get to go over, which probably should be done, because I noticed yesterday at the end of the little workout things we did, and there were a lot of people doing this, you know. And of course, I do a lot of stuff in plank or with support on your wrists and your hands. Your wrists, obviously, these are huge muscles, big bones to support your weight. Your hands don't have that. Your wrists don't have it. And if you've had injuries, or as you get older, you'll lose some of this. I have a little torn ligament in this one. There's all kinds of things that can happen.
I'm seeing more and more of it with all the computer use, you know?
Oh yeah, there's all the stiffness and things that, there's series of wrist exercises to strengthen. And one of them is that progressive loading where you're in plank and, you know, we line it up so it's like this, but you take your shoulders in front, so now you're extending more, or you go to this side, you go to this side. It's the progressive loading just to make those ligaments stronger. You can do it on your knees, you know, and then there's, I know Susanna does these, I don't know if you do, where you have it on the ground and you bend the elbow and straighten it. There's all kinds of exercises. Now, I'm sorry we didn't get to that, or I didn't put it in. I wish I had, especially after watching yesterday with several people going, yes?
One thing you showed us how to feel our multifidus. That was also helpful to rest the wrist because we were alternating.
Yeah,
It helped a lot.
yeah. Oh, good.
Felt good.
That's good. Yeah, and okay.
The more you use your core and your legs and all those weight-bearing things, the happier the wrists are.
Also like with this, like instead of like kind of taking your
Yeah.
hand into this, just really helpful.
Right, and that's, sometimes it's hard to do, especially if you stay there very long, but it takes, because now this is stacked, so now you've got a straight line to support your weight. Now, I personally, I didn't bring them with me, I wish I had. I have WAGs, they're gloves. I don't wear them in vinyasa so much because I don't like them in down dog, but they have a silicone pad. So in my class, I didn't have you do bear pose. I'm sorry, because I love bear pose. It's another one of those core things. But you're on your hands and your toes. Well, here, let's just do it. Let's just do bear pose. You can do it on the floor. Yeah. So you'll come to hands and knees. And this is one where I would use the pads. Just put a blanket under your knees if you need. Lift your knees up. No, this is bear pose.
This is called bear pose.
Yep. And your knees are just barely off the floor, and you're just hanging out here. Now, can we advance this, progress it? You bet. So extend your right leg back, right leg forward, left leg forward. And reverse left and right, left and right. Now walk, opposite. And back and forth. Your butt stays down, knees are close to the floor. Knees are right on the floor. So it's not a down dog walk, it's a bear walk. And if you can't, there you go. Say again? That's exactly, that's your game, that's your goal. And then you just walk around the room.
And you can see how something like that is easy to put in the sequences that you know with the tradition, because it's the traditional pose played with, right? You're not really changing the function of it, you're teaching it more deeply, so pretty cool.
It is, and people always have fun. My class is pretty vocal, so I get a lot of comments about things they particularly don't like. But I say, okay, bear pose, and they're like, oh. All right, now we're going to some injury prevention. There's a lot of information in here. A lot of it's based on studies that I've been able to pull. Let me find the one I want. So, people get injured in yoga? Of course they do. Yeah. How many people have had an injury in here? From yoga? I mean, just 3? Just 4 of us? 5? So, most people get something sometime, and it could be just tweak, and it can be short-lived or longer. So, this is some information in a 2019 study from the Journal of Body Movement Therapy, which is a peer-reviewed article or journal. It's a cross-sectional survey of yoga participants looking at the frequency of yoga-related injuries in this particular group. There were over 2,600 people that answered this survey, mostly in North America or Europe. 79% of them were 31 to 60, 84% female, which is kind of how yoga is practiced in this country. There's more women than men. Of the 45% reported no injury, which I think is pretty good, actually, out of 2,600 people. 55% reporting injury, 28% mild strain, sprain, and that's what you see kind of across the board. People usually injure themselves with something mild that they recover from, and it doesn't stop them from doing yoga. 63% reported a moderate sprain or nonspecific pain that did not require treatment. These lasted a little longer, 6 to 12 months in this particular survey. 9%, 4% of the total sample were more serious injuries requiring medical attention. Some of this it makes sense. The greatest predictor is how long you practice yoga, whether you're a teacher or whether you're just a participant, a student. The longer you practice, the more likely you are to have something happen. The good news is most of the time they're mild. The conclusion of these authors looking at this particular survey is that it's not any higher risk than other activities, other sports activities. This one came out of 2019. So we're going to do literacy research, or research literacy next. But what can you see right out of the chute that makes this less accurate? That's right. Yeah, it's a self-reporting survey. Yes, it's published in a reputable journal, but it is self-reported, so there is inherent bias in that. People will think their injury is way worse, or, yeah.
So also, the specific types of injuries weren't specified, so does that make it difficult to really apply this?
No, because in this particular study, it was across the board sprains and strains. We're going to look at some others that tell you exactly what is injured more often. Okay, and then we're going to get into the really bad injuries that, unfortunately, they don't happen very often. So there are several of these little studies we're going to go through. I will tell you that in yoga, I mean, this is the gold standard, and this is part of the literacy, is a randomized controlled trial. They don't do that in yoga so much. There are some, but a lot of times they're set up to look at a because randomized controlled trials are, I don't want to, I'm getting ahead of myself telling you about the next lecture, but they're set up to look at things with a specific endpoint, and we'll go over that more in a little bit. So this is another study out of 2018. Now, when we look at the literacy research, it's kind of a thing for me when I'm looking back at studies as how old are they? Because things change. These are fairly recent, but there needs to be a lot more good research done. But right now, we're just going to tell you about some of the ones we have. This is a epidemiologic a systematic review. That's actually pretty good. They look back at a bunch of studies, and then they collate the data. It's also in a good journal. Now, this guy, Holger Kramer, we're going to talk about him when it gets to literacy research, because we're going to go through a paper and look at how to evaluate it. His name's everywhere. I started looking at the number of papers this German guy has done, and I was like, why is he so involved in this? We'll see that in a few minutes, but his name's on a lot of papers concerning yoga. And you'll see his credentials shortly. I wanted to, this particular one is a review of what's called observational studies. So it's not, they're not quite the same as a survey. They look back at these studies where they observed people over time. Prevalence and incidence are frequently confused. Tina, you can jump in whenever you want to, because prevalence and incidence are frequently confused when we're talking about statistics. And I will tell you, every time I have to do statistics, I look them up again, and I don't have to take my boards anymore, so I don't have to review them again. But prevalence refers to the proportion of people that have some condition over a period of time. And incidence is the rate that you have of an incident also in a particular period of time, but it has to do with the rate, not a big long time. So I just tell you that because in this study, there's a lot of participants in these observational studies. It's over 9,000. And they had 9,000, how many is it? 99, almost 1,000 yoga practitioners and almost that many non-yoga practitioners. That's a pretty good comparison when you have that many people. Like I said, some of these, they're not free articles, so I can't get quite all the information unless I wanted to pay for it. So the incidence of an adverse event in a yoga class was about 22% out of all these people. That's pretty high. It sounds pretty high. The prevalence, however, was 4.6 over a year. And 21, and I don't know, I didn't see this data, 21 to 61% over a lifetime. That 61% means just about everybody has something sometime. That's pretty high. That could be, you stubbed your toe jumping forward in your mat. It's not broken down. Again, in this study, most of the injuries in this, looking at these studies, they were almost all musculoskeletal things. And the serious adverse events is pretty low, 1.9%. Yeah?
So the second bullet point says the incidence of adverse events in a yoga class was 22%. That seems high.
That's what I just said.
And also, is that yoga practitioners or non-yoga practitioners? Because they did both, right?
Yeah, but if they're not practicing yoga, they didn't get injured in a yoga class. So this is...
Oh, I thought they brought into a class people who have done it before and people who hadn't done it.
No, they're comparing, they're using people that do other things. I don't have exactly what this control group did. Okay.
My question with these studies is always this.
Is what?
Is always, And this is where Yoga Alliance has such a hard time, is you cannot get two methods of yoga to agree on what's important, right? There's different traditions. So to me, there's quite a huge difference between an Iyengar class and a Bikram class. Or
Oh,
an Iyengar-
absolutely.
Right? So I'm like, they almost need to have separate studies for each.
Well, I'm going to show you when we're in the yoga literacy. I'm going to show you a study. It happens to be a survey, but I'm going to show you a study that does exactly that. Yeah, it's interesting to look at where those injuries occur. This is kind of like your overview of injuries that happen. Okay, we'll get a little more into the nitty-gritty here in just a few minutes. So compared to the non-yoga practitioners and the yoga practitioners, the risk of fall was about the same. I'm sorry.
About population and simply, because those, they don't do yoga, do they do hiking or other sports?
Yeah, that's
Do they do athletes, probably they do bicycling?
yeah, this is one of the studies I could not get the whole thing. So I don't know exactly what they were doing. I don't know if they were people that didn't do anything or they were people that were doing other sports. And that's important.
Yeah, the simply, I think the simply strategy probably can make proof. That's what
Well, and that's part of the problem with looking at studies in yoga, and it's also part of the problem if I can't get the entire article. All right, so basically they made the conclusion from, and it is a large number of people. They looked at a large number of people. And I have to assume, because I looked this guy up, that they actually did a good control group, just based on what I've read about this particular author, okay? But you can't tell from this study, that's true. Okay, this is another one. It's called the, and you see who's the lead author on it? I wasn't intentionally looking for him, but he kept coming up. It's a systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized control trials. Now we're talking. This is in the Journal of Epidemiology, which is a well-respected peer-reviewed article, journal, okay? Again, I couldn't get this whole article, but he evaluated all these, and we're gonna talk about meta-analysis and random control trials in a few minutes. But he took all of this information and compiled it, and his conclusion was, yoga is as safe as other sports. Now, I'm going to show you some numbers, because not every sport, that's not true of every sport. Obviously, professional football and things that, yeah, there are some that, but for those of us practicing yoga are probably not doing professional football. Okay, so we're not comparing apples and oranges. All right. This is, I tried to find a more recent from the National Health Statistics Report. This was from 2001 to 2014. I don't know that they haven't done it. I could not find a more recent report on this. But this is a huge number of people, and these are based on people that visited ERs and what was reported, okay? 29,500 people seen in the yoga injuries in ERs. Now we're talking about across the country, okay? Of those, and this is a question you were asking, trunk injuries was number one. Trunk includes the back, okay? So there's a little more, Lauren Fishman, who is the rehab specialist out of New York City and in Iyengar Yoga, has done some studies looking at this himself, and I have a lot of respect for him. And it's the low back primarily. Obviously, you can pull muscles in other places, but they broke it down into trunk injuries. Of those, 46% were sprain or strain. I don't know why that's 45%. No, 46% were trunk injuries, 45% of those were sprains or strains. I don't know what the others were. Injury rate, and this makes sense, injury rate is greater the older you get. And so people over 65 are generally going to have more injuries. Fractures in older people were 3 times the rate. I will tell you about a couple of, and I just learned about one like a few minutes ago, an hour ago, about a fracture that I'll tell you about it when we get to that part in yoga. Okay, where are we? The hospitalization rate was greater the older you get. I mean, these things just make sense. And just like the longer you practice, it's true in older people, it's true in younger people. You're more likely to get injured the longer you practice. A different study found less than 1% of injured yogis quit. They don't quit because they got injured in yoga, they heal and they come back. There's a Canadian study that showed lower extremity sprain was the most common reported injury in that particular one. And children, if you're doing kids yoga, you have to be aware that they can be injured. You know, they're pretty flexy bendy and they don't always have the strength to balance that, and they'll try anything. So they get injured fairly frequently. They also heal a lot faster than we do, or than I do anyway. So these are just tidbits of different studies that give you some information. You have the slides. The other thing is, because so many people are practicing, the rate of injury has increased. In the Canadian study, it increased 80% over 7 years, which is pretty high. But then there's that many. Okay, so now let's look at why do we injure ourselves? Okay, excessive student effort is a big deal, where everybody in the class is doing crow pose and you can't quite do crow pose, but you're gonna try. So instead of putting that bolster in front of your face so you don't fall on your face, you fall on your face and break your nose. You know, it's that pushing yourself instead of adapting or modifying what you need to do. And peer pressure is a huge thing when you're in a classroom. That's why I really emphasize you have to give people permission to adapt and modify and do what they need to do for their body, and be okay with that. Be okay with that. Because you know your body better than anybody else. And I don't know your body as well as you do. Lori doesn't know your body as well as you do. And you know if something hurts. You know if your brain says, I'm going to face plant, you're probably going to face plant, right? So set yourself up, set your students up, give them permission. So that's a big one. Now, I don't know if any of you read William Broad's book. You probably read it, right? It came out quite a while ago. If you haven't read it, it's really fascinating. Now the data is probably outdated, but there was a big brouhaha when that book came out, because he did an article in the New York Times and it was about the injuries in yoga, and everybody was up in arms that how can he write this, that people get injured in yoga when we're supposed to be doing it for all these health benefits. And it's actually a great book. I wish he had a sequel to it. But in his book from 94 to 2011, 16% were male, but 35% of the injuries were male. Why do you think that is? Yeah. Is that, sorry, honey, testosterone. Yeah. And they think they are stronger. They are stronger than we are. But they think they should be able to do something. And so that's just a mental mindset. and then it breaks down what most of their injuries were. 20% strains and sprains, joint dislocations. I mean, wow. 30% fractures. That's got to be falling out of things, because guys, have big, thick bones most of the time, unless they're older. Nerve damage. That's that could be, I don't know, but it could be, from the low back. It could be sitting too long, and I've heard of yogis who sit in Padmasana for 2 hours and compress a nerve. It's not a permanent thing, but it's not pleasant if you do it. If anybody wanted to sit in Padmasana for 2 hours. So other things, inadequate teacher training. That's why you're here. If you're going to teach, Lori, Susanna, all your teachers are trying to make sure you're adequately trained. And if you're not going to teach, that you're adequately trained to take care of yourself. Yeah? And even if you are a teacher, you still have to be able to take care of yourself as well as your students. You kind of are responsible. You're the leader in the room. So if people don't tell you things, that's kind of on them. But still, if you see it, and I have a little anecdote when we get a little further along here. One lady who came to one of my classes, she never came back. I'll tell you why. We talked about that. There are more people doing yoga. So there's going to be more injuries. That's just volume. Now, that unknown pre-existing condition, that's a big one. That's a big one. And not everybody, and it's kind of there are HIPAA rules for us in medicine. I can't tell you about this person over here has this, okay? Neither can you in a class like this. But they may not want to tell you if they have some kind of pre-existing condition. Jason Crandall, who I really respect, he's a wonderful teacher, and he doesn't ask. He said he doesn't ask people. He doesn't want them to tell him, because then he feels like he's responsible. I personally think you are responsible to some degree, but if they don't tell you anything, there's nothing you can do about that. You can ask. I generally ask. Yes?
Can you say something like, if you have issues with like this body part or that body part as you're teaching it, then you make this modification. That way, you're not privy to their personal information, but you're alerting them that there are options.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you teach a class, the first time you see people, you don't know anything. You don't know how they practice, what they do, what they don't do, what they can or can't do. Observing people becomes very important, and that's a skill.
They may be making
But it's
modification on their own.
if they
You don't
know.
about, so you can ask.
If they know, for sure.
If, are you doing this for a certain reason? If not, then you know.
And I do that frequently. But there's also a way to say, and you'll notice we did it yesterday, with some of the harder stuff you were doing. And I'd say, if you need to keep your knees bent, that's fine. If it's there for you, if you can, extend that right leg, left leg, whatever it was. Okay, so the people that want to do that, do it. And it ups the ante just a little bit. But the people that, for whatever the reason, don't want to, you've just given them permission to do what they need to do. Okay, to avoid whether their back hurts, and that may be just a temporary thing. You don't know if somebody's got a backache because they're going on their period, and they just don't feel like doing that. And they don't want to say, I'm on my period, I'm not doing that, So yes, there are ways to cue that give people options without having to go into great detail about their...
It's interesting. There's two ways that this really has showed up in the history of my teaching. One is, let's say I'm teaching level 2-3 class, the peak pose is splits, Anamanasana. You show up and you're like, how are we feeling today? Anything tender? I deal with yoga buddies. I'm dealing with a hamstring cut, you know, like, and you get like 3, 4, 5 people, I'm pivoting and not teaching that class, or I'm pivoting and teaching really strong isometric contractions wherever we're in our hamstrings, right? So that you can kind of customize in the moment.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I love this studio is because, I'm used to classes where, the teachers ask, like, anything tender, anything going on with your body, and then you have the freedom to say without, too much detail. You can say, oh, my neck, or somebody else say, oh, my lower back, or whatever.
And many of them are so grateful they relieve us of that competition.
Right.
That inner confidence.
Yeah, and
Just because your class, we were able to do all that homework yesterday because there was this positive vibe that we can do it.
oh, good.
Yeah. But I don't think otherwise you're going to come out unscathed.
Yeah, and it's a big thing, I think, teaching, and it is to be able to make people feel comfortable to do what they need to do. And we talked about the sequencing. If you noticed yesterday when we were doing the Parivartanasana on the bolster, that's actually very pleasant with your hips elevated to do that. Yeah.
Can we discuss about the contraindications first of any pose? Is if we are doing forward fold
Yeah,
or
we're
backward, if the person is having vertigo or high BP,
yeah.
can we discuss that first as a general that forward fold is not recommended for high BP or like this,
For high what?
high blood pressure?
Um, I'm going to get to high blood pressure in a few minutes, but there are some modifications. I've actually had somebody who had severe vertigo in my class. Unfortunately, if you have severe vertigo, you probably better go home, okay? Because there's too much movement. Depends on why you have vertigo, but if it's your inner ear and those little cilia or that fluid is moving, there are different reasons to have vertigo. But if you get severe vertigo, and most of the time you lay your head down and the room starts spinning, that's benign positional vertigo, you probably don't belong in a yoga class right now, okay? And yeah, I had a lady who just, she knew she had vertigo, but she was feeling a little better, so she came to class, and the first time she laid down, she was in the bathroom throwing up. And I said, I think we need to call your husband, and let him come and get you. So, yeah, you don't want to deal with that.
That is the point. Is if someone is there from the group, if someone has high blood pressure or vertigo, and if they are doing the things which are not recommended for them, do we have to first address as in general that these poses are not recommended for?
Well, high blood pressure is different than vertigo. That's very different. If your blood pressure is controlled, if you're taking medications and your blood pressure is controlled, generally you can do whatever you want to do. And we're going to get to, but there are some things that's not true. There are some things where you don't you don't have people do particular poses because it can be dangerous. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Vertigo is one, if somebody had severe vertigo, call somebody, get them, they need to go home. You don't need to deal with that in your class, and they don't need.
Vita's touching on a really good point though, which is that this is why you'll see in the sequencing, I'm like, stay to the book I gave you, stay to the book I gave you, don't add other things in there. Because you need to know, you need to really learn the original form. Because then you'll know, oh yeah, this is about the spine, and then if I'm going to alter it, or you tend to know, like, so then even if nobody tells you, you can speak to that in your cueing. If you feel this in your low back in this pose, then do this, right? So you can kind of build that into your cueing.
Absolutely.
And that prevention is almost better than anything, because a lot of people won't tell you, even if you ask.
It's true, but I started to say when we were doing the Parivartanasana with the bolster, and that's actually very pleasant, to do it. Then you straighten your legs, That's a little harder. First one and then the other, then you do both, then you go to hollow body, which is a whole lot harder. So if you notice the way I said that was, if you find that that one is a little bit more than you want to do, then do the one you just did. Do the one that's comfortable for you. And again, you've given people permission. They have something to do. They don't have to lay there and do nothing and feel excluded. They feel like they're going to do what their body needs right then. Okay?
I think that's the number one, the way you speak about it, like rather than saying level 1 here, level 3 there, right? The way we speak and what we offer is how we create inclusion. You know, so that's a buzzword right now, but you're just clearly laying it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I told you, actually, one of them moved away, but I had a 20-year-old, 25-year-old in my class who could do everything. She was a bodybuilder. And then I have my 84-year-old guy in the same class. I don't really find it a challenge, because it's kind of fun for me to be able to find those things, because I'm going to actually show you how to do a back bend on a chair. So if you don't push up into wheel, or you don't want to push up into wheel, or like me, you have a shoulder injury and my shoulder doesn't want to do that anymore, but I can give him a back bend he can do with his chair, and she's over here in full wheel. But he's got something to do and he feels included. Plus he gets the benefit of doing a back bend. There's all kinds of ways. It's something you learn to do. Now, I will say, I generally want to know. I said Jason Crandall doesn't ask. He doesn't want to know unless he's changed his teaching since I last talked to him. I do want to know. I want to know if somebody has an injury or a pain, if they feel like telling me, and I'll phrase it that way. But it's a little bit different because I'm a physician and I'm going to be held to a higher standard than you are. You don't have to know the things that I know, okay? So I really do want to know, because I really don't want them to get injured in my class. I mean, I know you don't, but you know, you get held to a higher standard. And if you decide to teach, you're going to be held. Say again?
One of the things in our feedback, I don't know if you noticed, I wrote that I don't feel comfortable giving a cue for something I'm not able to do, or all the sequences I'm making are kind of staying at that level. That's my worry, because I don't want to cause a harm. There's different issues with that.
It's real interesting. I was in a class with Jason in Hawaii at a retreat. And Jason used to play hockey all the time, street hockey, and he calls himself a stiff white guy. He's not quite as stiff as he makes himself out to be. But he had an Asian lady in the class who goes to his class in San Francisco who could probably take her foot and touch the back of her head, you know. So there were a few poses that we were working on that he said, she does it way better than me. So he had her demo the pose. I have had other people demo a pose for me, particularly when I was injured. But sometimes it's not about, like you said, the peak pose, it's the journey to get to the pose. So like learning crow pose and putting the bolster in front of you, or putting blocks under your feet, or putting your head on the block, is a way to work to that, and allows the people that already know how to do crow to do it, but it also allows other people to have some way to get there. You'll just have to work on it and decide what's comfortable for you. You have to be comfortable as a teacher. You have to be, yeah. All right, other thing, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. We talked a little bit about peer pressure. The other thing is, if you're too tired, you're just too tired. Like last night, you guys looked pretty wiped. Yeah.
Sorry, we speak a large class. That's what I'm interested. What's the reasonable size for class?
Oh gosh. That's, you know, when you first start teaching, if you teach a class with 25, 30 people, you'll probably be tearing your hair out, you know. So I know they're going to give you chances to teach each other, which is also nerve-wracking, by the way, to get up in front of your peers and teach these classes. However, they're very forgiving because they have to do it too. So I don't know that there is a reasonable size for a particular person. Again, that's going to be something. If you work in a studio and you're teaching a level 1 class, you're going to teach who comes in. But if you're teaching at a smaller place and you know the class is smaller, or maybe you want to start out that way, then that's what you would do. There are people that teach out of their home. And now you've controlled how many people you're going to teach. It's not easy if you're teaching in a studio to control how many people come in for a class.
Classes that are super big, like some of the ones that have 80, 100 people in them have assistants.
Yes, they do.
And Susanna will have assistants out at the winery when it's really full. And yeah, so everyone's supported.
Even in Galapagos, where we didn't have huge classes, we had an assistant, you know, that roaming around, one or the other of them. And it is true, I've been in some of the yoga journal classes where the room is twice this size and the mats are this far apart. I mean, they're this close. I mean, if you're doing sun salutations, you have to stagger yourselves because you're going to hit somebody. And there usually are assistants in those classes, and they're usually, you know, covering specific things. So there's not an absolute answer to that question.
Yeah, I think, too many students not giving enough attention, the injury rate there.
You can teach, you know, you could teach a class just for older people. You can teach a class just for kids. Yeah, you can choose what your avenue will be. I've taught all kinds of classes. I kind of find fun teaching these people over 50. It's fun for me to watch them progress, to watch them be able to improve their balance. I get a kick out of that. And I've taught all kinds of classes. I've taught yoga for athletes. I've taught all kinds of stuff. So you'll figure out what your path will be. The other thing is, as I mentioned, if you're on your menses, you know, maybe sometimes you just don't feel like doing things. Maybe you want to go do yin, and so you don't have to jump around or anything in vinyasa. Maybe you just don't feel like doing that. That's a place people will get injured. And if you don't feel well, whether it's for that or whether you're sick, I was doing a headstand in a class and I was sick as a dog. A yoga journal in San Francisco, and I've forgotten that anatomy guy's name. He's an Iyengar teacher. So I was in the center of the room, went up into my headstand, and I was like this. And he quickly came over and says, "You need to come down." And I was like, "Well, I can usually do this." But yeah, if you don't feel well, I mean, that was stupid on my part. That was stupid. I shouldn't have done that. But again, it was that peer pressure, and I knew I could do it, but I didn't feel well, so you don't do it. Yes?
When I started in yoga, I would feel pressure to do what everybody else is doing. And with age, with time, like now I'm in my 40s, I'm like, if I don't do it, I just don't do it.
And that's fine. That's exactly what you should do. Because on any given day, you may feel great, you know, and strong and ready to do everything. And a week later, maybe the kids ran you ragged, you know, your husband didn't make dinner and whatever, and you just don't feel like it. So it's always about listening and giving your students permission to do the same. All right. Let's see where we are.
And while she's switching it up, I have found too that like the teachers that know me really well know when something's wrong with me.
Oh, absolutely.
Sometimes before I do. When I had the tumor and I didn't know it, I was observing training. We had public classes. And I was putting my head down, and it was right before I got diagnosed. It was progressing worse and worse, and it was hurting. like when I put my head below my heart, I couldn't breathe. I was getting head pain. And I went out in the lobby to get a drink, and Susanna happened to be out there. And she said, I'm worried about you. You need to go home. And she finished monitoring the class. And I knew that I must have something really wrong because I know how busy she was to do that. And, you know, that was really helpful to me to understand partially about oh, something's really wrong, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
Because I had never been sick at that point in my life.
okay, so a little more about ways we get injured. We talked about coming into and out of poses using, especially when you're in these long hold poses. And yin too. If you're in a really long hold and you flop yourself out of it, now that everything is stretched out. So you need to come out of that slowly, just so that muscle, and it you know, it'll come back to where it was, but you don't want to make it do too much work when it's in that the stretched, I won't say overstretched, but if it's in that lengthened position. And that's true if you're holding standing poses for a long time too. I know in vinyasa you don't do that so much, but in Iyengar style you certainly do. We already talked about that. Age we talked about. Unfortunately, after you start to lose muscle mass at about age 30, unless you're working on it. 3 to 8% per decade, and after you hit about 60, it accelerates. So it's important to keep working on that, but it depends on your students. If you have older students, you kind of want to know. You don't need to know, okay, you're going to lose 10% per decade because you're 59, you know. But you need to know that person is at risk of having less muscle strength, less muscle mass. The balance can be affected. And obviously, women can lose up to 20% of their bone density after menopause in 7 years. That's astounding. And we all get there. We'll talk about osteoporosis in a little bit. Obviously, that can predispose you to fractures. The vestibular system begins to die off. The cells in that vestibular system begin to die off after the age of 50. Blood pressure could drop. It also can be high, which we'll talk about shortly. Reflexes and coordination. As you age, you lose those things, which is one of the reasons I love the teacher I work with, Carrie Owerko, who she's 60, I think, and the things we do are things that a lot of young people don't do. And it's all about variability and motion and keeping yourself going, okay? I've become much more acutely aware of it. There's an increased fall risk. And as I told you, and I repeat this over and over, if there's something that you can't do in yoga, your life is not going to change. It's just not going to change. And if one day you get to it, great, you know, but if you don't, so what? Okay, this is back to the 2016 survey, talking about where those injuries were. I'm not going to say it again. Okay. Now, the most catastrophic injuries in yoga have occurred in the neck with, and there are some catastrophic things that have happened. And usually it's headstand, handstand, halasana. Those are the big three. Now you can see handstand and headstand, it's going to be falls out of it. And your neck, you saw how little those vertebrae are. You saw you have the rotation in your neck compared to your lumbar spine, the difference in the strength. So we really weren't made to stand on our heads. We just do it because it's fun. And you can strengthen the bone, that's true. But some of the ways people get injured is falling out of it, and shoulder stand, moving your head around. I don't ever teach shoulder stand without blankets. I don't do it. I will do a shoulder stand. In fact, we were in Galapagos and we did it, and I didn't have a blanket, so I did kind of this half shoulder stand. I was like, my neck, I'm just going to keep it right where it is. But you don't move your neck around. I don't teach halasana to people that are not capable of doing that. You can teach halasana if you have a chair, and you can do half and have your feet elevated on a chair, or it depends on your abilities or flexibility, a bolster. So there are ways to modify it so that you make it safer if somebody wants to do that pose. I personally like doing a lot of things with a bolster or blankets because then I can protect my neck. I'm not doing this to it, okay? And God forbid you're in one of those poses and you look over at the person next to you. That's a way to get injured. That's a way for your students to get injured. You don't move your neck around when you're in these inversions or any pose where the neck could be at risk. We're going to talk about some of those injuries here shortly.
Can I add one?
Absolutely.
Teacher in a big class, and you are offering that, one, don't roll your students, can always offer, if you already know this posture, this isn't the time to learn this posture, and then before you go up into it, to tell people to keep their nose facing the ceiling, because as you walk through, people in the post will do this, to look at you,
Yeah.
and see what you're doing, and if you haven't said that in advance, they won't know that they're not supposed to turn. So that's super important, just like Marilyn said.
Yeah.
If you say it in advance, they're less likely to do it, to be looking around in that posture.
And I know they haven't learned headstand and that, but you're going to learn about position of your head when you do these, because you don't want your head like this either. I mean, the natural curves of your spine is the way it's supposed to work, whether you're right side up or upside down. You want those natural curves. And when they go over that, I'm sure she'll emphasize that to you, but just, protect it. I do not teach headstand to this group of people over 50, but you know how we do it? We do it with chairs. So I don't have to worry about their necks at all. And my 84-year-old guy goes up into a headstand on chairs, and they're so proud of themselves. And I'm proud of them too, It gives people a way, and by the way, in the class, when we're teaching with 2 chairs and doing a headstand, which is kind of pleasant actually, they always have a partner. They always have somebody there that can help them up, help them down. Now, I know my students, I know who to put with who. So there are ways to do it. In a class like this, I know you guys, you've done it with 3 blocks, where you go up against the wall and your head's here and your neck's not on the floor. I mean, your head's not on the floor. It may graze the floor, but you don't have any weight on, it's all on your shoulders. It's the same with 2 chairs. Chairs is a little bit more interesting just because it's higher. So you kind of have to kick up. I also never in one of my classes do I let people kick up into headstand. I do not let them do it. They have to have the core strength to go up. And I'm going to...
So far we've done handstand and forearm stand. We've talked a lot about that. Like, this is where you start, because we don't cartwheel into handstand because you need to understand the base. And if you don't have the strength for a really good forearm stand, probably not ready for headstand, right? You have to have that strength and stability. So that's a good place.
I'm going to present this study. It's not in your, I thought this was in there, but it's not. When I did the 300-hour program, Downtown Yoga, I had to do a kind of a dissertation. And I did it on risk versus benefit of yoga. And in this is one of the studies that was done out of the University of Texas. Unfortunately, it's not here, so I'm just going to have to tell you about it. And it was done on headstand. And it was done with a bunch of yoga teachers who are accomplished headstanders. So let me see if I can find the right page. I just have to tell you about it because I don't remember how many people were in it. 45. They had 45 yoga teachers. They were all practitioners, and they did this really well, this particular study, although it's small. They used force plates to measure the forces on the head. They had a third of them went up kicking up. And this is, after this study is where I said, absolutely nobody kicks up. A third of them went up one leg at a time, just controlled. And the other, no, that's not true. One of them kicked up, one of them bent knees, and then you can take your knees over and then up into a headstand. And the other was a pike position, where you go all the way up in pike. Which one do you think was the less force?
Bent knees.
Say again?
Bent knees, where you're on your knees, like on your
And so why do you think that? Tell me why.
Because it's more gradual. It's not an immediate acceleration of force on the neck.
And that's a good reason to and why do you think that the pike would be?
Because, well, even what I experienced yesterday with my shoulder feeling better when I engaged everything and the strength was happening and we were like pulling our palms towards our feet and engaging our abs and it was distributing, maybe the wrong word, but it's like distributing the load. So if you're going in full pike, you are really strong and that's displacing that from your head.
Yeah, and actually you're right. You are correct. The pike is the one that produced mainly because if you go up with your knees, you still kind of kick to get your knees get in that position, even though you know
So
it's
when you're talking about the pike, what exactly does that look like?
legs are straight.
So literally you're just like,
Yeah, you're like in a dolphin pose. You put your head down on the floor.
you're using your core to pull.
You have to use your core. You have to use your core. There is no way around it. And it's very gradual. You know, there is no jerk to it at all if you do the pike. It's not easier, but it is the safest way as far as pressure on your neck. And I said, they measured these with force plates, so they actually got good information. Yeah, the maximum force on the crown of the head ranged from 40 to 48% of the person's body weight. That's equivalent to placing 60 to 72 pound weight on your head. I mean, that's a lot. And so you can see where your neck is not, it wasn't designed to do that. So building up the strength to do it is most important, and using the core so you do it gradually and safely. Okay. Now, the other interesting part of this, because these were practitioners that do headstands regularly, okay? They're all teachers. They're all accomplished. And what happens when you're in a headstand? And they were doing regular Shirshasana 1, like this, not tripod. So what do you think happens if you stay in that pose? I think they stayed for, I think it was 5 minutes. I'm not sure. I have to read it. But what do you think happens to the force if you stay in that pose 4 or 5 minutes on your neck? Now, mind you, you have your arms too. So this is Shirshasana 1. Say again?
Does the force compound?
People begin to get tired, and they begin to transfer the weight out of their arms and just on their head. And I can tell you, I do it too. When I do headstands, I'm there. But there is a particular Iyengar teacher out of New York City, very famous, that You can't even take her class if you don't stay. I think it's 11 minutes. Is it 11 minutes in her? You can't take it. You'll never hear me say that in a class. You'll never hear it. If you get into headstand and you want to come down, you come down, you know? If you're just working on headstand, and there are ways to strengthen by lifting your head off, it's like a headless headstand, but you're in more like a dolphin pose to build that strength. So that's kind of a fascinating thing, that even very accomplished yogis, when they stay in those poses for a long time, they transfer the weight to their head and their neck.
How did it get to be that it was about time on your head? Going back, do we have evidence of that? What's
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean.
like headstands more in the beginning of asana in yoga, more ancient, versus you have these teachers who then did they do it? Make it about length of time in a headstand? Like what was the evolution of like that was what you had to do?
You know, maybe you know the answer to that question. I know for Iyengar, and I don't even know when they started doing headstands, because yoga originally was not asana. It was sitting and meditating for hours. That's probably how they got the nerve damage in their legs. But I don't know when anybody started doing
So
headstand.
it's part of the Ashtanga system. Every time you practice, there's a set closing, and it has shoulder stand and headstand in it. And the way it was explained to me is really interesting. It's very safe. They're very sacred poses in the traditional yoga because they deal with your crown chakra and the energy in the kundalini in you. So it's interesting how it was explained to me that, like, because Ashtanga is such an outwardly expressed energy, it's so physical, that this is going to help you contain and pull in your energy. I mean, I'm going to paraphrase a lot. And then it was really there to kind of set you, help you ground, help you connect to the divine. Almost like the earth is blessing you, and then you rest. And that's what we do. The very last thing is a headstand.
And did it originate in Ashtanga, do you know?
In lots of traditional practices, they use it. Like in, what's the name? Is it Shivananda? You do a headstand between every pose. In a lot of these traditional methods have different uses the way they use it, but it was called the headstand was the king pose, and shoulder stand was the queen.
Yeah, that's in Iyengar. It's king and queen. That's
They're wonderful
yeah.
postures.
Oh yeah.
And it can be lengthening for your neck. It can feel good to invert against gravity so that we're always in the lower half of our body, so grounded with the forces of gravity. It feels good.
I actually love headstand.
Yeah,
I love it.
Blood flows back obviously to the heart, and shoulder stand and headstand. So, I mean, we'll of course talk about contraindications, but we'll also talk when we talk about history. We'll talk about the history of those postures, which is like many of the more complex postures, they have an interesting evolution.
Well, that was I never thought about when it actually originated. Probably the Patabi Joyce or somebody. I don't know. Certainly Mr. Iyengar, who came along a little bit later than the original founders of the asana, and he had issues as a child. If you look at his body, it's a little bit strange, but he started doing yoga for his health, and he's the one that developed using all the props. He was determined to make yoga accessible to everybody, and I think it's great. Now other forms use props as well, but that's great. Okay, back to the injuries. So we talked about the low back or trunk injuries being some of the most common. We said the neck injuries are most catastrophic. And we talked a little bit about how to modify for shoulder stands and for headstands. Handstands, obviously using a wall, but even using a wall, learning how to cartwheel out, because one of the reports I have in here was a gal who hyperextended her neck in handstand as she fell out of it, and injured her vertebral artery. So, yeah, those are, again, it's a neck injury. Those kind of things are rare. Thank God they're rare. Okay, so in the low back, a lot of this has to do with the alignment of being able, because if your hamstrings are short or tight, and they, you know, where they attach on the ischial tuberosities, and you start to forward fold, and your hamstrings don't let you do it, and then starts to pull. And now your back is in this, remember I said this position was the way this is a second. So being able to extend and use your core, or bend your knees so your hamstrings aren't in it. Yeah, it depends on your student, depends on you, and how you feel. Okay. The twists are a very common way, especially those of us with SI joint. The forward folds and the twists, those SI joints, we talked about being able to let your pelvis move if you need to. I'm not saying you have to do that all the time. And even with an SI joint, I don't do that all the time. I sometimes want to twist from here and keep my pelvis because I want these guys to do the work, okay? But those are the modifications you can use. Obviously, if your low back or your hamstrings don't allow you to do the full forward folds, I said you bend your knees, you sit up on something. You sit up higher. You can sit up higher and bend your knees if you need to, so you can get the pelvic tilt that protects your back. I'm not going to injure my back doing this, okay? But I can injure it doing this. Now, I have said for a long time, and it comes out of that same book with the rotation, the graph you were showing, the picture, that if you go quickly, if you hold a pose, a forward fold for a long time, that you shouldn't go into a deep back bend right away. Now, the reason for that happens, but it's kind of theoretical, and it has to do with the discs. And we talked about they're 85% water, and they move. They move around. If they didn't, you wouldn't rupture one. But when you fold forward, if you're in a forward fold, like Paschimottanasana, and you're just there forever, those discs will migrate toward the back. Because now it's more open back here. Everything is flexing. If I do the full fold in Paschimottanasana, which you may or may not do, because if you kept your spine extended, the discs are going to stay right where they are. But sometimes we forward fold, and you just hang out there because that feels good too. But those discs actually move a little bit. So if you come back up, if you're in an Iyengar class, you're never going to do that deep forward fold and then do a wheel pose right away. You might do it, but you would wait. You might do a gentle twist, something that allows the discs to get back where they want to be. Then you can do the other thing. In vinyasa, it's not such a big deal when you go quickly, because they don't move that quick. It's not like you forward fold and they scooch back there. They slowly get pushed, you know. Or back bend's the same. They go the opposite direction when you do a full deep back bend. So in Arun's class, if you do deep back bends or deep forward folds, and generally if you're doing those, you're doing a lot of them in an Iyengar class. You're just like forward fold after, and you stay there forever. So your discs are for sure going to move some. He will never do a back bend afterwards. And vice versa. I said I think it's theoretical. I've never seen anybody injured with it. I've never heard of anybody injured with it. But just so you know. And I actually still do that.
And I think because it's so hard to get really quality data on all these little specific points.
Absolutely.
We're taking this larger body of research and applying it as intelligently as we can. right? You're just kind of logically saying, oh,
Right.
okay, now this is more space for the discs to move. So this is something that shows up a lot, is that somebody says, I have a bulging disc.
Oh,
So then we know.
everybody who's ever had an MRI has a bulging disc. Everybody. I mean, if they're of a certain age, I guarantee you have a bulging disc. And the problem is we treat patients, we don't treat imaging. Okay? If somebody, this is a little aside, my brother-in-law says he has spinal stenosis. He got in Ohio, 2 opinions that he needed to have surgery. One of them, like, kind of emergently. And I was at his house, and he was up on the roof cleaning out the gutter. He's down there cleaning, and I was like, okay, you do not need emergency surgery. You might if you fall off that roof, but, and I told him a different guy to go see at Johns Hopkins. And I said, you don't treat that MRI that showed that bulging disc, or unless it's causing the issues that you see in the patient. So if somebody has a bulging disc, okay, I'm sure I have more than one. But your doctor is the one that will address that, and they should be able to tell you.
So if somebody's experiencing pain, and
That's a different story.
So then
That's a different story.
How would you address that in asana?
You mean if they have
So
sciatica?
they say, I have a bulging disc that bothers me, and then you're teaching Paschimottanasana.
Oh yeah, then
Then
the,
how would you
the
adjust it for them?
they would have to be up on something. I would not have them doing forward folds. That's a way to
Would
injure
you
your
put them
disc.
on their back to get the hamstring stretch, or?
You could do that. What I would do, if you want to have them, if they want to do Paschimottanasana, then you have to lift it, you have to have them up, they have to keep the spine extended. They're not going to round it. They have to stay, and they're going to be where they are, okay? You could do it laying on their back as long as it doesn't hurt, you know? But it's easier to sit and keep your core engaged longer than it is to have your feet up in the air, unless you want to do it at the wall. You could do it at the wall, Viparita Karani, yes?
When I have 2 bulging discs, mine was caused was a all the way during pregnancy. So I have one neck, one lower back, and when it flares up, I can't really move. So I know it's like someone going to a yoga class, if they are having a flare up in their bulging discs.
Yeah, if you know that you have issues, I mean, the key is the symptoms match the results of your imaging. That's the key, at least for us physicians. That's, if you just have a bulging disc and you have no pain and I just incidentally found it, I'm not going to do anything about it, okay? But if you have numbness and tingling down your arm, or you have pain down your arm and you have a disc here that might, and it's in the right level, have to be in the right level, which, you know, that's a medical thing. That's a totally different story. Okay.
So, generally speaking, the counter poses that we work into a sequence, let's say, they're going to be gentle, if you will. Counter poses would be more, you're not going to a counter pose for the full expression of those things per se. Those are just to counter the things that you really are building up to and trying to get into that full expression.
Yeah.
Give you
Fair to say.
balance, to give you balance,
Yeah.
to help you. You know, if you do all hips, then you walk out feeling like a duck, right?
Right.
All right, or,
You don't want to, you don't want to walk out of the room like you're,
but if you have a forward folding class, then you might do like Shalabhasana as a counter pose, right? Or vice versa. You've done it with Vedanyarasana or camel pose, and you want to balance energetically, physically with the forward fold. Then you're going to put time in between. You'll see on their sequences, I keep saying, put a transitional pose here. So a gentle twist, even something more neutral can help that transition.
Okay.
To go from one extreme spinal movement to the other.
yeah. I still, because of my training, I don't ever go quickly from one of those things to the other, especially if I'm going to keep working on that, that particular thing, whether it's forward folds or back bends or back extensions. You know, there are different kinds of back bends. Okay, what else do we talked about the low back. Whoops. Oh, no, no, no. What are you doing? Okay, so stop it. We talked a little bit at the beginning. I said, I'm sorry we didn't do more on the wrists. We should have put more wrist, but they can do that. I know, I've been in Susanna's classes where she does a lot of this wrist stuff that it feels kind of torturous when you do it, but it's also really good for your wrists. It is, according to Dr. Fishman in New York, the physiatrist, it's the 4th most injured joint or body part, okay? And of course, he deals a lot with osteoporosis. Okay, what else do we want to know? Things that help protect when you're in down dog, instead of just hanging out, is contraction. Contract those muscles. What supports your joints? Your muscles support your joints. Your ligaments support your joints. Now, we already know you can strengthen the ligaments, but you're not going to stay in down dog for 5 minutes. Okay, you're probably not. That would strengthen your ligaments, but most people can't do that. But you can stay there a while, but you contract those muscles, you get the protraction, you get the action you need in your shoulders to support the pose as long as you can. Now, if you have, I said I have a torn ligament here, I use those WAGs that have a silicone pad, but if you're on your mat and you're all of a sudden doing something, I think Kavita was you I showed yesterday, that you roll that mat over once or twice, put your wrists and your fingers go over the edge so that I just rolled up the end of my mat. This is stretched out, by the way. So my wrists are up. I have a little, yeah, sit. So they're going to be like this on the floor. It's hard to do when you're sitting in a chair. You can use blocks. This is softer. You can use blocks, but it's softer. Okay, so if that wasn't enough, I'd do it twice. Now I've just got a little lift. They do make wedges for your, and yeah, if you know you're the person that has that and they have wedges, you grab a wedge. And then you just throw it under, so when you go into your down dog, now I don't have nearly as much pressure on my wrists. I've got some cushioning there, okay? There is a way to do bear pose with blocks and tilt them. It's fun. It's actually quite fun. Or you'll have to try it. Because you tilt the blocks and balance in bear pose, and it's like this, you know. I just thought of that. Okay. They also make other jelly things that you can use to support your wrist. There's all kinds of ways. If you're the person who constantly has that and it's not getting better when you strengthen, then yeah, give yourself some padding. Blanket doesn't work so well just because it slides around. We talked about the wedge. Get this guy. Okay, we talked about the low back. I'm going backwards. Okay, so the knees depend on your ankles and your feet for their alignment. And we talked a little bit about alignment and how that can be important, but also moving and changing the load will strengthen both the knees, the ankles, the feet, the ligaments, the eccentric contractions, all of that stuff. And you guys have the props. I mean, if you're propping pigeon and you can't get into pigeon, you can use the bolster, you can use blankets, you can do it on your back. You can do a reclining pigeon, or your student could do a reclining pigeon if it's just not available to them. And I'd put in there if they've had prior surgery, especially like my little guy who just had his hip replaced. I know the contraindication, but I want him to bring me a note from his doctor and say he can't do this or he can do this, you know. Okay, here we go. Osteoporosis. If you have osteoporosis, I'm going to show you this. This is his website, it's called Prima Yoga. This is Dr. Lauren Fishman, and he's the physiatrist, and he has developed and done studies, and these are poses you know. These are all poses you know. I cannot give you a copy of this because I paid for this class, and I don't think he'd like it, okay? But you can see the way he did it, and they did the studies on this to show the percent of bone that's increased with doing regular yoga poses, okay? And these are all things that you know, bridge pose, standing poses. We do know that running, standing, walking increases hip density. When you have osteoporosis, the things that will fracture most often are that femoral neck. And we talked about the fact that you lose it. You start losing bone, or after 50 for sure, after menopause. And men too. Men will lose some bone, not like we do, but he also, this is great because he shows all the modifications. He shows a classic way to do it, the beginner way, and an intermediate, and he shows it, and as I said, he's an Iyengar. He trained with Mr. Iyengar, so he's very much into using the props. But the really good news about this is that it helps build bone. This helps build bone. Now, what he added in the back of this had to do with wrist stretches, and I tried all these. These were not included in the studies he did. I'm sure he will do a study on it because he sees these patients and people all the time. But some of these poses were things that we did in Aikido, which is real interesting. Things like this, where you just twist your wrist and hold it, okay? And this way. Now this is another one. Take your hands out. The backs of the hands face each other, and then bring them together. I have right on the top, clasp, and turn them over. And you can do it with motion. You can do it with motion. And you would do several times. And it's variable from person to person, whether you're that person who hyperextends or not, your joints, or if you have issues, and then obviously shake them out and put the other one on top. These are pretty easy to do. You know how I showed you how we did Garudasana? And that's okay. That's okay, as long as you are doing that. So you twist it where it'll go for you, and then bring it in, and after you do it a few times, you kind of have to shake your wrist out. He hasn't done that study yet, but I'll let you know when he does, because it's in this, and I'm sure he'll do it. He also did, and somebody I told yesterday, maybe it was you, Tina, that he did a study on scoliosis, and he has. I don't have that study with me, but he has good information that doing things like side plank with the convex side, if you know which side is the convex side, and just pick, I'm going to pick a side plank, but it could be triangle pose or something else. You do it twice as long on that side as you do on the other. Okay? That, like I said, I don't have that study, but you can probably pull that one up by looking at PubMed. His name is Lauren Fishman. Okay, now, I actually have one of my own students who has osteoporosis. She came to me and told me the other day, and they put her on the medication, and I gave her a copy of these exercises. So she's doing them every day now. And then when she goes back, you know, hopefully the combination of the medication and these exercises will help her. Okay.
Marilyn, I know you can share that copy, but do you want to just tell us the names of the poses so we can kind of
Yeah, sure.
use that later? Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to give you the names of the poses, and he has them beginner, intermediate, and the classic pose. So you can pick which one. Tree pose. And triangle pose. Warrior 2, and he's pushing into a wall with the front hand. Parsvottanasana, side angle pose. Pavarita Trikonasana, revolved triangle. Shalambhasana, locust. Bridge pose, which we do all the time. Suptam Padangustasana. 1, 2, and 3. No, 1, 2. He only did 1, 2 on this study. Marichyasana 3. That's the one where you sit with one leg in and this leg out, and you can do it against a wall. You can actually do it in a chair, or if you're that person who can bind, like these guys, then you can bind with it. Marichyasana just means pose of the sage. It's some sage's name. So, he used Marichyasana 3 and Marichyasana 1. One has the leg extended, 3 has the leg folded. And then he did these wrist stretches. But as I said, I know that's not part of the study because he said so. Okay, now, and his name is, you do have his name in there. So if you go to PubMed, you may be able to pull his articles up, both on scoliosis and he's also on YouTube. He shows all this stuff on YouTube. He's really quite a good guy. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about glaucoma. They've done these studies, and people that stand on their heads or do inversions, even when you lay down, your intraocular pressure goes up. And the most recent study I saw, they did a group of people who had glaucoma and people who did not. And everybody's pressure goes up. Everybody's eye pressure goes up. However, it comes down very quickly. The person who came to my class once and told me what she had, and I didn't let her do inversions, and she never came back, had lost part of her vision in one eye. Not in my class, but she was doing handstands, and I wouldn't let her do it. I said, if you have glaucoma, I don't want you doing a handstand. I don't think you should be doing that. And she was an avid person to do, push herself to do the inversions. Well, and then she had lost part of the sight in one of her eyes. It's there. The most recent study I saw actually showed in a group with glaucoma and a group without glaucoma that the pressure went up in both of them. It did go up a little bit more in the people with glaucoma. And they were on medications for their glaucoma. But they all returned to normal. And when they get stuff like this, they say, okay, we need a bigger study. I'm still, I don't want anybody, if I know they have glaucoma, I'd just assume they don't do inversions. It may be a little bit of overkill based on that last study, but I don't want to be that person that.
Does that include something as simple as down dog? You are inverted, you're not putting pressure.
Your pressure is going to go up if you're in down dog, but no, they haven't. They measured it with headstands, but not with down dog. All right, it wasn't significant enough in down dog. Okay, but yeah, it'll go up a lot. It almost doubled, which is that's a lot when you're talking about pressure in your eye. Okay.
Did you have to disclose that if in the class you were going to use that stance, say if you have a comment and do those things, or just the liability form that everybody signs?
Yeah, if you have a liability form, because this is one of those things she accidentally told me, and it was not a question I asked. Although when I was teaching inversions, I would say, if you have high blood pressure that's not controlled, or you have glaucoma, then we're going to do a different pose, and then they will tell you something. So I bring it up because I don't want them doing it. Yes?
So how you go for massage therapy, and then kind of they give you the first initial questionnaire where you list what conditions you have, if you're pregnant,
Yeah.
what it is. Is there room to do that in the waiver form you're offering to our students?
Yeah, I don't know. You'll have to ask.
Very casual way, like, do you want to disclose any of your physical or mental health conditions?
And that's probably a good way to ask it is, do you want to disclose? Because
But then at some point we will be looking at the forms, I hope, and that's a good way of looking.
yeah, that would be a fair way to ask it. It doesn't mean they'll be truthful. And as I said, this gal, she was an accomplished handstander. She really, and she didn't do it in my class, but she didn't come back. And thank God she wasn't in my class when it happened. Thank God.
Here's the one thing I've learned to add too is recent LASIK surgery. Give it some time before you're upset, because
Yeah, and generally their ophthalmologist will tell them that, you know.
good.
Generally they will tell them, you know. Yeah, because they don't want their surgery screwed up. They want people to do well. So, what else? Hypertension, we're talking about it. If people have hypertension and it's controlled, I don't worry about it. If they have uncontrolled hypertension, that's a whole other ball game. But and I don't know if they'll tell you that either. But those for inversions, those are the things I bring up because I don't want them to be in that situation. If you're on your period, you don't feel like doing things, just don't, you know, or do something different. Do restorative. You know, it's all about how you feel. Now, the basal artery syndrome or cervical artery dissection they're actually not exactly the same thing, but very similar. And extension of the neck. And we looked at that on this guy with his vertebral arteries, yes? Here. So I don't think I can extend his neck too much, but see how you could pinch that artery? I mean, and there have been cases, and even in young people, that they've had strokes, get a clot. And sometimes these things will happen days down the road, not right away. These things are rare, But again, it's all about protecting the neck. That you don't want to do something to the artery in your neck, any of them, right? So we talked about that already, not turning your head. So the cervical artery dissection, and those are rare, like 15 per million people. So that's just a general population. So that's not a common thing. It is catastrophic, but it is not common. Okay, so you're probably never going to, hope you never see this. Now, the varicose veins, and lots of people have varicose veins. The varicose veins, if somebody has varicose veins, those are broken valves in the veins, generally in your legs. So obviously you can break valves anywhere and have what's called a varicose vein. So if you sit around in Padmasana for long periods of time and the valves are broken, you're going to make them worse. So generally, if I knew somebody had bad varicose veins, I'd have them sit in Sukhasana or Baddha Konasana or something different than Padmasana, which puts too much pressure on those. The central vein and artery occlusion, these are things that happen in the eye. If somebody's had a detached retina, no inversions, period. You don't do it. And again, I hope they would tell you, but I don't know. This is kind of a spontaneous pneumothorax. When this kind of stuff happens, that's where you actually spring a leak and get air between the lung and the thorax. And I mean, if that happened to you, there's probably something wrong with your system. It happens in wartime and things like that all the time, or accidents, but yoga practice, that's a stretch, I think. But there was at least one case report and somebody doing chaturanga. So you're aware. Because there's reason not to do chaturanga. Okay, so these are just some anecdotal stories I've found reports of. A 52-year-old with 30 years of practice doing headstand every day. And she started to have neurologic symptoms. She went in, got checked out. She had degenerative joint disease in her neck. And then had compression. And it caused what's called a myelopathy. So you start having symptoms in your arms and legs. It took her a long time to get over it, apparently. But then there was a study where they looked at 18 yogis, all teaching for more than 10 years, and they didn't have degenerative arthritis. In fact, their necks looked stronger and healthier. So this is the problem sometimes in yoga, is you'll get this case report, and then there's something else that's totally the opposite, which is why, yes?
Wouldn't genetics have a lot to do with that?
Oh, absolutely. You bet.
That's kind of the unknown there, right? I mean,
Yeah, most people who have...
consistently yogis have stronger spines, but then you end up with a bit of a genetic problem.
Well, degenerative arthritis is generally familial. That's kind of the old age arthritis, the wearing out arthritis, which we talked about yesterday when we talked a little bit about arthritis. And if you knew you had really bad arthritis in your neck, she must not have been having pain, because otherwise I don't know why you would stand on your head if you were having pain in your neck. I hope not.
I have a question. I'm just trying to understand. Do yoga teachers also feel pressure, or as if they're not good enough, if they're not offering?
I'm sorry, I can't hear in this room.
So do yoga teachers feel pressure, or if they're not good enough, if they're not able to offer these poses in the class? Because what I'm learning more and more, there are so many other ways to get benefit.
Oh, absolutely.
Or the risk of doing a fancy pose like that just to look good, or just for fun.
Well, and that's one whole other section of yoga that you can teach if you want, you can teach beginner classes all the time. You can teach the older people who, they're not going to stand on their head most of the time. So you pick where you want to be. I mean, it's a wide open field. You just want to be qualified to teach it, whichever you decide. Yeah, it's. That's why I said you know, one of my primary teachers. I didn't want to be that little, what do you call them? The little mini me. I didn't want to be that mini me person. So for me, because I'm a physician and I'm into anatomy and physiology, I teach from that perspective a lot because I really like that. So you'll decide, you'll figure out what works for you and what kind of classes you're comfortable teaching. Yeah, Kavita.
Can we teach the pose even if we don't do the pose? Just if we know the theory and all principles behind it, is it possible to teach the pose or not?
I don't usually do that. I don't usually do that.
As if I'm not doing handstand or
Yeah, there have been times where I taught the pose, but I was injured, but I knew how to do the pose. You know, I usually, if I will, like I said, teach how to get to a pose. Even if you don't get, like we were talking about the full expression of the pose.
Yeah.
You know, so what?
But when I
It's-
was in, this is why verbal instruction is so important to learn well, because when I was in treatment, I'd feel really good on that third week before chemo, and I'd come back to teach. Well, for the first 3 months, I still wasn't putting my head below my heart, but I could still teach because I knew how to do it. I could express it safely. I could,
Yes.
you know.
And she'd done it 1,000
help
times.
Yeah, I knew it in my body. I could still feel it in my body, and that's different than like I've never been able to figure that out. There's lots of poses that I don't teach because I don't understand them in my body yet.
Yeah, and that's, I don't teach things I can't and have never been able to do. If I've been able to do something, but I'm not comfortable doing it now, I will generally teach the journey to get to that pose. And then, like when I had the little bodybuilder in my class and she wanted to go right up into wheel, go for it. You know? But I didn't have to teach her. Now, I did correct some things on her because I've done the pose, I know the pose, I used to do it all the time. So I think it's a difference in whether, I wouldn't teach a pose I've never done, never been able to do. I just wouldn't. And unfortunately, there's a few of those. Okay, where are we? Oh, the next is a case, these are just the anecdotal reports, a young woman who fell out of headstand at home. She'd had 2 months of practice. I don't know why she was doing headstand on her own after 2 months of practice, but people do stuff like that. And then she lost consciousness and she sheared that vertebral artery when she fell out of it. And that was a young person. Yeah, this is one who was doing the shoulder stand with no blankets for 18 months and injured her neck, C5, C6, C7, and did nerve damage. And as you said, you can see, after a couple of months, she was able to walk with a cane. These are not nice things. All right, so there's another vertebral artery one where it was a locust pose and with a hyperextension. You actually see people do that. I always cue people to look just a little bit in front of them. There are people that want to take their head back, but taking your head back, and I didn't get to, I said this yesterday, but we didn't spend the time on it. When you're going into a back bend, there are muscles here in the front of your neck you can activate instead of just letting everything fall back. And you can, just like your spine has these curves, you can use these muscles to keep that curve nice and easy. And when I'm teaching Ustrasana or things where the head goes back, I don't care if you don't take it all the way back. And I always tell them, you do what's comfortable for you, because if I see somebody like that, I'm going to correct it, because then they're not using any of the muscular support for their neck. That makes me nervous. If I see them very carefully doing this and using these muscles to go back, fine. Then they're being as safe as they can be, protecting all these structures that you want to protect. Yeah, there's another one, young yogi, hyperextended to the top of the head. By the way, I stopped teaching it that way. That's the way I learned it. You push to wheel and go to the top of your head and then push up. And I stopped teaching it that way just because of that hyperextension in the neck. This particular young person had a cerebellar stroke. Now, there's a couple other things, just a little bit. Remember that the cerebellum is primarily the coordinator with those proprioceptors, your vestibular system, your visual system. So you'll lose your balance, okay, and have trouble walking and motor control. Depends on how big it is, exactly where it is, but now these are 4 stories of which I have personal knowledge, and this is the one I'm going to add to one of them, what I heard this morning. This is a person I know, and I know her well, who was doing headstands, typical long time Iyengar practice, doing 20 to 30 minute headstands at a time. And she gave herself varicose veins in the neck, doing headstands and shoulder stands for long periods of time. And those valves, you know, they're one-way valves. If you rupture them, they don't, you're done. And you can't really take varicose veins out of your neck. You kind of need those veins. You can take them out of your legs, but not the neck. The second one, this wasn't in my class. There was a gentleman, and we had rope walls, and he was coming out of a rope wall. And if you ever use rope walls, you carefully come out of a rope because your foot's in there. And he caught his foot, knocked himself out, just knocked himself unconscious. So again, moving yourself slowly, holding on to things if you need to, or your students need to. That was kind of a freak thing, but you don't want that happening in your yoga class. This particular person I knew had osteoporosis, and in my class I had her do modifications of headstand with the chairs. She was in someone else's class, fell out of headstand and broke her clavicle. And I just heard this morning that she was in a different class, lovely person, I know her pretty well, and she was in someone else's class and fell out of a headstand and broke her wrist. This poor lady has had 2 fractures falling out of headstand. I personally think she shouldn't be doing headstand. Because obviously if she has osteoporosis, she's at risk. She is at risk. And if she falls, she's going to break something. And the other one I told you about, the one that was doing inversions in glaucoma with glaucoma and lost part of her sight. There's a bunch of references. Lori, this Physiologic Handbook for Teachers of Yogasana, Mel Robin, that's the one.
Awesome.
And I said there's a newer version than what this came out of, but that's a really good book. Bathroom break?